She's reported extensively on the situation from the Syrian border region. Tara, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So while we're zooming in on Syria itself, let's put aside all of the big talk at the UN and at the White House. Tell us a little bit of what you've witnessed on the front line there in terms of getting aid to where it needs to go.
One of the things that we need to talk about closely and put in perspective is that we're talking about a population that has been dealing with this crisis for 6 years, and we're moving into the 7th year without very little humanitarian aid, without very little medical personnel. And it's important to note that both schools and also hospitals, medical clinics, and medical facilities have been on the front lines of these attacks. So the situation is very dire for people inside Syria, people in Idlib and other parts of the country in dealing with this very horrendous issue.
Tara, I've heard you describe as being a doctor, being in the medical profession in Syria, actually being a very political job these days. Explain that.
Absolutely. I got a chance to speak with a lot of physicians who fled Syria into the neighboring countries of Lebanon and Jordan. And I remember speaking with a neurosurgeon a couple of months ago who was detained by the Assad regime. And he told me that, Tara, while we're being attacked by strikes, we're also being detained because we're constantly accused of supporting the rebels. And to put in perspective, when you're a physician and you deal with emergency situations as such that we've seen yesterday, you really, don't pull the patient's sides and say, okay, do you support the regime or do you support the rebels? Your job is to attend to the patient. But unfortunately, doctors are being targeted and accused of attending to the rebel groups. And according to Physicians for Human Rights campaign, since the beginning of the crisis, over 700 doctors have been killed, and this is an ongoing issue.
Tara, from those people that you spoke to there, from those nurses, physicians, we know that the chemical attack yesterday was far from the only one. Over a dozen have happened since the beginning of the Syrian war. Is that something that you heard? Are witness accounts something that you've encountered?
Chemical attacks are ongoing. I think one of the biggest questions here is what kind of agent was used. And by looking at the photos and by looking at the videos that are coming out of Idlib, you can very clearly assume that it was a very strong chemical agent. And that's something that the world should closely pay attention to, considering the 2013 events that the Assad regime was accused of using sarin gas. But again, by not testing the fragments of the weapons used or the barrels, you can't really say what kind of chemical it was. And talking specifically about sarin gas, we have to understand that it's an odorless, colorless agent, and it's very hard to detect, but its effect is 20 times more than cyanide. So the images are very telling, and we can see the catastrophe in front of us. The question is, what is the international community going to do next?
Right. A question that has repeated itself for the better part of 6 years. Tara Kangarloo in New York, thanks very much for joining us. We're continuing the conversation here on Debrief after a quick break. More on that meeting between the Jordanian king and President Donald Trump happening right now at the White House. Much more on the table than just Syria. Stay with us. We'll be right back.